They found it! They found Amelia Earhart's plane, at least I hope they did, by using sonar. According to a former US Air Force intelligence officer, he said he believes he found the wreckage of Amelia Earhart's plane, which disappeared 9 decades ago, on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean using sonar data from a deep-sea drone. Hoping to solve an 87-year-old mystery, explorer Tony Romeo's plans to launch a mission later this year or next to find long-lost plane, which a massive US search failed to do in 1937. And considering Amelia Earhart's disappearance had been one of the most speculated mysteries in the Western world, let's talk about her and her accomplishments in celebration of her beloved plane's discovery, or possible discovery. Amelia Earhart was born on July 24, 1897. Her mother disagreed with society's emphasis on raising quiet, prim little girls, so she encouraged her daughters to engage in fun, cool activities, which was extremely unheard of for the time. As in this era, the primary role of most adult women living in the first half of the 20th century was to care for their family and home. Men were most often working outside for the home and to pay and assume the role of the household head, and census collections were designed with the social reality in mind. Census purposes and other household members were defined by their relationship to the male head, as women's working in their homes were not considered gainfully employed. Before 1931, they were considered to have no occupation, and women in some non-traditional or unusual occupations, moreover, were not tabulated in census publications. Considering she died around 1939, she was probably still dealing with these gender norms, but with her mother encouraging her and her family to stand on their own gave her the advantages as well as the strength to follow suit whatever she wanted to do. In fact, she even built her own roller coaster. Yes, Amelia Earhart built her own roller coaster, but not the giant ones that you can imagine. Everyone knows by now though that Amelia was not your typical young girl. She loved to wear pants, shoot weapons, and run in the woods and play adventure games, and it would surprise very few to know that she had built her own roller coaster. With the help of her uncle Carl Otis, Amelia built a wooden ramp similar to the roller coaster she remembered from St. Louis vacation. Of course, Amelia was the first to try it out. As her sister recalled, Amelia rode the crate down the track much faster than either of us had anticipated. As it careened down to the track, we heard the sound of the splintering wood. The car and Amelia departed the track when the car hit the trestle and both tumbled onto the ground. Amelia jumped up, her eyes alight, ignoring the torn dress and bruised lip, and she exclaimed happily, "Oh Pidge," a pet name for her sister, "it's just like flying." During Christmas vacation in 1917, Earhart visited her sister in Toronto, and World War I had been raging. Amelia had saw returning wounded soldiers, and she volunteered treating wounded Canadian soldiers returning from the European battlefield, and was a social worker at a settlement house in Boston. After receiving training as a nurse aide from the Red Cross, she began working with the Voluntary Aid Detachment at Spadina Military Hospital. Nearby were pilot practices fields where she discovered her passion for flying, and at the time the Canadian branch of the Royal Flying Corps were headquarters at the Wellcliffe College at the University of Toronto. The campus was crowded with air cadets along with a handful of airplanes used as teaching aids, and there were also several airfields in and around Toronto, giving Earhart a plenty of opportunities to explore her new passion. And when she became a celebrity for her aviation feats, she began delivering lectures and writing books about her flights. According to her, she stated in quote, "I think the aviation bug entered my system at the time and probably never left, because I went back to the States and went to California and took my first ride in 1920. Which, speaking of flying, might have given her the first thrill inspo to be a pilot, and when she did, Amelia Earhart was the 16th woman to get her pilot license, and when she was just 23, Amelia Earhart took her first airplane ride. It was just a few hundred feet, but from then on she was determined to learn how to fly. She received her pilot license from the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, the governing body of sports of aviation, and although Amelia Earhart likely flew several planes during her flight training or with friends, public records show that she owned at least 5 different planes during her life. Her first plane was a Kinder Aster, which she called the Canary because it was bright yellow. As soon as she got her wings, she began to lift herself up to Amelia Earhart as the first woman to travel across the Atlantic by plane. On June 18th, or also speculated 17th, 1928, she and a couple of male pilots flew from Newfoundland, Canada, all the way to Wales, which took about 21 hours. Since Amelia had no experience in using plane instruments, she was simply a passenger on this flight, but the pilots did give her an added task to keep on the flight log, and this still proved historic and brought Amelia a hero's welcome at home and a visit to the White House. Earhart became the international celebrity after completion of the flight, and Earhart's life changed dramatically in 1928 when the publisher George Putnam, seeking to expand on public enthusiasm for Charles Lindbergh's transcontinental flight a year earlier, which tapped Earhart to become the first woman to cross the Atlantic by plane. She succeeded, albeit as a passenger, but when the flight from Newfoundland landed in Wales on June 17, 1928, Earhart became a media sensation and symbol of what women could achieve. In May 1932, Earhart became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. In 1935, Amelia was the first pilot to fly alone from Honolulu, Hawaii to Oakland, California. Near the end of the eventful flight, she also listened to the radio broadcast of a metropolitan opera. I don't know which opera it was though. I forgot to look it up, sorry. In the meantime, Earhart continued to promote aviation and helped found the group the 99s, an organization dedicated to female aviators. The organization was founded on November 2nd, 1929 at Kurtz Field, Valley Stream, Long Island, New York. All 117 women pilots at the time were invited to assemble for mutual support, the advancements of aviation, and create a central office to help keep files on women in aviation. Louise Thandon was elected secretary and worked to keep the group together as they struggled to establish themselves and to grow. Those early purposes continue to guide the organizations today. The group selected the name 99s to represent the 99 charter members, and membership was immediately open to other women as they became licensed pilots. In recent years, memberships have been opened to include women with student pilot certificates, and in 1935, Purdue University hired Earhart as an aviation advisor and career counselor for women purchasing the Lockheed plane, as she dubbed her Flying Laboratory. Earhart became the first woman vice president of the National Aeronautic Association with authorized official records and races. She persuaded the organization to establish separate female records because women did not have the money or planes, and thus the experience to fairly compete against men for world titles. Amelia was also pretty political, outspoken, and especially for women's rights, as she lobbied Congress for aviation legislation. She also lobbied for birth control rights and supported women in politics and business, and endorsed the draft for men and women and even the elderly to promote equality and peace. But aside politics, she was also an entrepreneur and a fashion designer. Earhart designed a line of functional women's clothing, including dresses, blouses, pants, suits, and hats, initially using her own sewing machine, dress form, and seamstress. In 1935, Earhart became a visiting professor at Purdue University at the invitation of the Purdue president, Edward Elliott, as an advocate for higher education for women, especially in engineering and science. Earhart, former pre-medical student, served as a counselor for women and a lecturer in aeronautics. Elliott was also interested in supporting Amelia in her flying career and convinced Purdue benefactors to purchase a twin-engine Lockheed 10E Electra for her. In 1937, Earhart wanted to do something bigger. Amelia wanted to fly around the globe with one crew member, Fred Noonan, who she completed most of the global journey, a distance of 22,000 miles, and had just 7,000 to go. On June 1st, 1937, she and navigator Fred took off from Miami, Florida in an attempt to fly 29,000 miles around the world, but by June 29, they had made it to Papua New Guinea, an island north of Australia and in the Indian Ocean, and they had only had 7,000 miles to go. But something happened. As he crossed the Pacific Ocean, they set out on July 2nd, 1937 at 12:30 a.m. and headed towards a tiny Howland Island, but they were never seen again. President Franklin D. Roosevelt sent 66 aircrafts and 9 ships just to look for them, but all the flyers had vanished. The official search ended on July 18, 1937, but to this day people are still trying to solve the mystery of what happened to the woman who changed aviation history. Amelia Earhart, an American aviator, became the first woman and second person ever to fly solo and non-stop across the Atlantic in 1932, 5 years after Charles Lindbergh's accomplishment the feat along with the navigator Fred Noonan, as she was attempted to flying around the world when their plane suddenly went missing over the Pacific. If she had succeeded, she would have become the first female pilot to do so. Romeo, the chief executive of the private exploration company of Deep Sea Vision, believes the wreckage of her plane lies on the ocean floor more than 5,000 meters beneath the surface, about 160 kilometers from Howland Island, roughly halfway between Hawaii and Australia. Blurry sonar images from the deep sea drone shows a plane-like shape on the flat, sandy ocean bottom floor. Romeo said that the images showed what appeared to be a plane matching the size of Earhart's Lockheed Model 10E Electra, which, by the way, if we remember, was gifted to her. The images, he said, appeared to show a distinguished characteristics of the plane as its twin vertical stabilizers on tail, and Romeo supposes Earhart ran out of fuel and landed on the plane on the ocean surface, and that the craft later sank onto the bottom where it would have laid ever since, little disturbed by light currents. The first step, he says, is to confirm it, and the next step would be if it's possible to raise it from the surface and restore it. Romeo says adding to the process could take years, but uncovering a page of history is something that we, like Romeo, hopes. Speaking of history, that is all for today. Be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best. Bye.